Beloved in the Lord, we are facing an exceedingly important subject. The subject is patriarchal society and secularism. The reason why it is so important is because we now have emerged, or rather become submerged into barbarism, neo-barbarism that we live in. That is apparent through arts, through mores, through tastes, and through behavior, starting with children, grown-up people, and so on. All that is nothing else but submerging into anti-cultural behavior. Of course, we know why. Historically, it's a process of apostasy. Our concern is Christianity, and therefore we have to make a quick survey how it descended, and from bottom up we have to look and understand. It's hard. In other words, our society today is undoing what for 2,000 years Christians were building, were gathering, were creating. Society today, consciously through news media and all that, and especially through their mindset, like these movie directors, you can see clearly, a movie director directing a movie, you can see clearly, he has lost all Christian, especially Orthodox principles, and he sees things from this contemporary, barbaristic approach, especially if they take a subject, something that took place in the Christian era, is especially painful to watch, because you see clearly that he does not know the essence. Why? A simple thing like that, they're making, which is Cecil B. DeMille, who's a very important movie producer, supposed to be Christian, dabbles with many Christian movies, you know, The Robe and so on, and he made this 10 Commandments. And Moses, the prefiguration of cross, was that Moses divided the sea and then put it together. That's the cross. That's the essence of the cross. The whole theological thing. Here they make a movie. He raises his hands and it parts and so on. No awareness that this is what Christian principle. Every kiddo knew that. That's the beginning of the cross. See, and there's no knowledge, and everybody gobbles it up and fine, and nobody sees anything. No one even mentions this. See? It's sort of cacophonia. It's sort of like, you know, all of a sudden George Washington marries Cleopatra, and they live happily ever after. And everybody somehow gobbles up. Well, you know, she's a historic person, so was he. Well, so he lived French Revolution. What's the difference? That has the attitude. In other words, very uncultured. We have no historic perspective. And we Christians have to understand this very principle, that the ideal or the original, the primitive, the beginning of Christian civilization was bound up with it rose out of particular layers of various cultures. You have the barbaric, highly uncivilized. Then you had the Roman, which was civilization, but it didn't know Christ. Then we had the Jewish, which is the Israelites, how their set of values. And into that came Christianity, bringing another element. Now, we call this a patristic, or based on patristic principles, or patriarchal system, which later on, through the process of apostasy, gave rise to the cities, and so-called secularism arose. We now live in the secular society. We cannot understand what it means to have церковное мышление, a church mentality, or ecclesiastical way of seeing things. And therefore we have to sort of learn from a situation when we already have lost it, we have to go back to it. Now, it covers various aspects. We have to cover a lot of, we don't have time, but in principle I want you to understand the principle, and then you'll figure it out yourself. Now, this patriarchal society versus secularism or worldly, in other words, churchly, spiritual, religious, versus as that society which is devoid of the ecclesiastical thing. So secular was not just at that time, let's say, Rome, the pagan Roman, but what secular is today is going away from understanding of patriarchal society. First of all, historically, the Christianity came in as a religion that opened up mystical realms. Jesus said, I'm not of this world. And therefore, his religion or his way of thinking was something to do with otherworldliness being opened. That's why the icon we call window into heaven, because it has to be flat sort of, that you can only look into, but you can't walk around like statues. When you have statues, walk around, and therefore you don't have 3 dimensions. In icons, the deliberate attempt is not to put perspectives, third dimension, or even coloring or making look as if third dimension. Deliberate attempt not to, because it's a glimpse into paradise. Jesus came upon this earth in order to lead us into this other realm where he came from. Therefore, that was the tone. It's a mystical understanding of reality. At that time, as I said, there was various primitive civilizations, or barbaristic, where, as you know, American Indians and so on, where there was the power of authority, various chiefs that took over through their power, their murder, and so on. And women's position was subordinate that of slaves. You could have many wives, slaves. You could beat them up. There's no defense, because they were a weaker element. More than that, in Chinese, early ones, that even up to today, Japanese and Chinese had looked very negative to the, when you're born, a girl is born to you. Because your family continues your family, and the women, you lose women. Now, in Judaic society, from which Jesus came, there's a whole set of rules, whole set of values, family values and so on, which also placed women in subordinate role, and there is not much talk about that women have the same soul as men, sort of the same thing. They were placed in a second. It was Jesus who indicated that men and women are the same, because they'll be like angels in paradise, are created here for paradise, and there'll be no gender. The pagan, the Roman, the religion, the state religion of Roman Empire had also women were subordinate, but they had high civilization. We heard from lectures here about the Greek and the Roman civilization, and there was a particular worldview which was different from that of Christianity. Christianity was interested, the followers of Jesus Christ were interested to have mystical contact with Jesus Christ. You see that through the liturgical thing, through the whole Bible is filled with those ideas, and they are all hinting. Jesus was there's prophecy about him coming, and when he came, he was conquered, so-called, by the world, the fallen world. They persecuted him and finally killed and tried to get rid of him, but he left a different approach to life. This approach we call the Christian way of seeing reality. The catacombs, as you know, historically, was a period where Christians were persecuted, both by the Jews, because they accepted Jesus, and did not accept the whole Judaic system. And although it was from the Judaic background, but they did not accept. They were kicked out of the synagogue, and they had their own church. The church was born in AD 33. They were independent, and Holy Spirit guided them. And this period, they were persecuted by by the Romans, because the Romans were afraid that that Christianity would be some kind of a cult or sect which will undermine the Roman government due to the fact that Christians were supposed to have they were the polytheistic system, that is, there are many gods, and Christianity was one, just like Jews, but they were not with Jews. Therefore, they were considered state criminals because they didn't accept the state religion. They would tolerate the Jewish, but they did not accept. Therefore, this period of catacomb, where they were persecuted, lasted until the 4th century, until Edict of Milan gave freedom to Christianity, and at this time Christianity developed a daily style of life. They had common mind. They were working to acquire oneness of soul. Not like robots, not like to be a Xerox copy, but to have oneness with soul through Jesus Christ. This state, and enhanced by liturgical context, this state was possible through the medium of asceticism. That is, their worldview was that of ascetics. They struggled, and they struggled in self-purification through the process of unseen warfare, and as a result was that they developed a society of people who lived and served liturgical services, all that, to such that with the intent of being here upon this earth only for a short time. Their whole aim was to another world. They were concentrating on preparing themselves for life after death. Thus, they were looking forward, ahead. And this made them disinterested in the worldly aspect. Of course, you can say otherwise, because they were deprived of worldly aspect. They were interested in heavenly things. But we know from the Scripture, from the Holy Fathers, and the apostolic writings, you can see that they were gearing their whole daily outlook to paradise. Therefore, the main tone in Christian church or Christianity is, I say again, otherworldly. They were not building the society here upon this earth. This was a second thought, building society here upon this earth. So, when they became free, then arose the Byzantine period, right? Emperor took upon himself to see to it that the teachers of Christianity have oneness of soul through the universe and all that. But what occurred? There was a definite attempt to depict that other worldly sort of concept of beauty here within the church. So their ideal was Byzantium. The ideal was, again, not bound up with this world. That also gave rise to monastic way of, we already discussed monasticism, the monastic way of seeing things, where people abandon everything and just sat there in the desert and concentrated, and were angel-like individuals who set the tone. And monasticism became the standard, the ideal, the image towards which all were striving at. Monastic concept of reality merged with the ancient Hebrew system and the catacomb mentality, and created a set of laws how to live. These laws are called canons, or the set of laws that are concentrating how to preserve a state of grace upon the earth, in society and in individual. This subject is the canon law, which we'll talk later on the end. But for the purpose right now, we have to say that when Constantine became emperor, and Christianity became free, and he was interested, and he was blessing the church, the members of the church, the bishops, the successors of apostles, to spread that ideal to the end of the world. He had a definite he had a definite idea set. In other words, they had to otherworldlyfy the world. Do you understand? Basically, that's what their job was. To set an otherworldly standard to people in the world. Some withdrew to the desert, but it wasn't an escape. Monasticism is not an escape, mind you. Monasticism is not an escape. Monasticism is an attempt to hasten paradisal state of man here upon this earth, but not sanctify the earth. It's not the heresy of Heliasm, where you try to live, that is, you're ready to enjoy this earth as if this is the heaven. Not at all. That's where Jehovah's Witness comes in. That's the heresy. And in the first century already they stopped this. In our creed, already in the second Ecumenical Council, they already installed that, and he was just in Buit Kansa. There will be no end to his kingdom. Now, thus the laws, as the poets say, he made the law upon this earth. The principle of love. And this set a very important thing. In order to have that law of love, you have to know the law of fallenness. Thus you have to know your fallen nature. Then you can defend it. That's the rise of patristic literature, ascetic literature. Now, what occurred after that is that Christianity coming out of the desert, coming out of the catacomb first, and then having the experience of desert to enhance their progress, they had to bring the tidings, good tidings, the gospel, to the societies that were pagan or barbaric. Their job was to touch their souls with this law of love, this otherworldly thing, which is a very refined thing, and indicate as innocent, very nice, the indication of the kingdom of, very nice. I wrote the whole book, a whole thing in the local language for the Aleuts, in which he inspires these wild men with something that is not tangible, thus relying on God's grace. Thus, the whole tone in Christianity is bathing and breathing the Holy Spirit. That was that movement that touched the whole world. That was the fire. It's the Holy Spirit that did, not so much people. And thus, it formed a whole way of living, which we today do not have, do not know, or we rapidly lose. We can sort of spot here and there, but our professor will give us lectures, all these religions, especially like he started with the Masons, that indicates how they were chipping away the fabric of Christianity. And then today we come to a bookstore, like today was, there's not one single book about Christ, really. The whole, it's millions of books, has nothing. It's as if deliberate attempt to erase Christ. As one place, Dostoevsky said, the attempt of Western civilization is to deprive the society, the Christian society, of Christ. And take him out. You leave the whole form, but you take the essence, the life. And thus you have what is today, sort of you behave. But we're interested in knowing what is the Orthodox behavior. How do we eat? How do we sleep? How do we reproduce? How do we treat our children, dogs, houses, everything? What is the Orthodox Christian approach, which gave rise to these wonderful saints that we are in love with. Now, the growth of Byzantium obviously gave impetus for cities or centers of Christianity to arise. The model was catacombs, which the monks took over and recreated that, and thus we have the idea of cloister. We have a Catholicon, or main church where you gather to pray, and surrounded by a cloister, you create your own world. Outside barbaric nomads roaming, but here you have a pocket of holiness. The whole idea of the Russian Kremlins that we know, that's exactly what it is. It's a bastion of holiness. It has towers, it has churches, monasteries. In the Moscow Kremlin, there's many monasteries crammed together. One cathedral, one next to another. You wonder, what's the use of it? What's the use? One big cathedral next to another. My mother was living in Vologda, and she says that there is one church after another. In one block, 3-4 churches. And she said, what's weird? Why do you have those churches? The idea was not so much a place of worship, or pragmatically speaking, a place where people would gather, not at all. They were little bastions, or like shrines for holiness. There was they were building a church, and Ivan the Terrible was passing by, and a brick fell down and almost killed him. He says, a miracle that I was saved, build a cathedral. Right next, another one. Huge cathedral, golden domes and all that. Further on, another one. 2 blocks, another one. They're all different style, different time. The idea is they were in love with the reality of holiness that came upon the earth. And men are the recipients of this undescribable, this glorious holiness which is beyond human logic, that can sweep people off into, like in the desert, and they live angel-like lives, to such an extent that angels appear and saints, and they walk on waters, and so on and so on. Now, and this is the ideal. And those Kremlins, or the Byzantine concept of city, was actually embodiment of these holiness, arrested moments in holiness in stone, to house the righteous people. Therefore, their lifestyle was different. We know that the first city was built by he who was the first murderer of his own brother, Bratoubica, Cain. He killed his brother, went and built a city. That's the essence of cities. And Christian, that's right. And the Christian concept is not at all. Christian concept is not a city where people get together and more conveniently live, so you can share your pork and your meat and all. Not at all. The idea is it's a bastion of holiness. And they live later on medieval, like in Munich and other places you can see in Europe, these medieval little towns, very pretty little towns, where you have church, like Mont Saint-Michel and others. There's a church, and there's houses around, and there's a wall. See, principle taken from a monastery. But it was more convenience sake. But the idea was to preserve that awareness of holiness. All these princesses would come and build their cloisters, and they would have these daily, like especially interesting Russian Tsar Fyodor Mikhailovich. I happen to be very much for him. Fyodor Ivanovich, the Tsar, who was spending most of the time praying, who spent vigils, and there's some kind of foreign affair, and they would say, Your Royal Highness, what are we going to do with this thing? He says, we'll decide that during the vigil. And he goes in the vigil, prays, makes prestations, then comes out. But true, he was, perhaps some say, was a weak king, because his brother-in-law, Boris took over and gave him trouble. But many people say he was absolutely crazy. But during his time, we have Patriarchal, Russian Patriarchal. In other words, an endless amount of saints, and he blessed all these, lots of monasteries. The northern Thebaid was enriched by this particular Tsar. The idea was that he was, as a monarch or as a king, was standing before God. It's almost like the Japanese emperor, that he has to get up before the sunrise in order to bless the sun to rise. If he wouldn't, then the sun won't rise. So the whole idea is that awareness of sanctity. And there were saints. And St. Paul says, we are saints. And they meant business. And they would raise children on that. And the very reason they would have children is precisely to have babies as saints. To justify their existence. When we supersede with saints the amount of demons, there will be paradise. We have a job to do. That's why they looked at a wife with great respect. Because through her, you can have babies. And babies are not too, as nowadays, oh, I don't want babies. 2 babies is enough. 3 or 4, and then there are all kinds of means to stop it. But the whole idea is that it's grace of God. Babies are the grace of God. In order to make more saints. Now, there are various aspects that come up, very important, that stem from this Christian patriarchal system. First, let's say, the family. We discussed the question of sex and gender. Gender was done by God for this earth in order to have children, so that there will be these saints. God created man first. He created the world for man. Man was crown of creation. And he did this in order to have Adam become on his free will so pure, knowing that he will fall and have these problems, that as one, that humanity will, through their holiness, being created in the image of God, they will supersede angels and thus redeem sort of their own calling. St. John of Kronstadt has a very interesting teaching about that. In other words, the idea of family is holy. And the holiest spot in the family is the bedroom. And there is the child conceived, and there's icons. And the baby is placed in a cradle. You see Russian peasants very clearly. You see this bedroom is a tiny little thing. He's got just one room and sort of a kitchen. And there's icons, and you have a cradle hanging right in front of the hook near the cat. And they sleep there, and she kicks the cradle, and the cradle goes, and he sees constantly, the child sees constantly icons. And thus, holiness comes in. The family idea was not, as nowadays, you kick your grandmother off and you put them in these old age home and let them rot there. The whole idea is that you have sons and daughters. Daughters, of course, are married to others, the boys. But your sons, you have these wings to your house. The land was to develop in order to feed, and the land was considered holy. You bless, on the 1st of March, you bless the land. You, on the 7th day, you let the land, you don't plow anything. You let it rest, 7th year. You bless the land then. In the beginning, the garden is Trifon's Day in February. Then on mid-Pentecost, you're all over, you bless again. Then before you work on the land, you reap and so on, you pray. The tradition was that the sower goes and he sees, and he goes, Lord Jesus Christ, Son, have mercy on us. He does so that the earth will give bread, which is our daily bread, upon which we exist. The earth is holy. All water, in ancient Hebrew, the word for life and water is similar. The whole waters, there's whole idea of water, blessing the water. The whole water is, when you drink water, you cross yourself. You have reverence towards water because that gives you life. Then your parents, You take care of your parents. They become a part. Grandpa, now the Soviet Union proved that a child that is being raised with the presence of grandparents is better, much more adjusted to society than the child who was not. They proved it. And now this will kick them away because, mother-in-law gives such help to the poor son-in-law that it's impossible to live, because we don't have a whole reason why. We discussed that before. The idea that she does not live with Jesus Christ. So she really lives in her children and her grandchildren, which is building idols. Mothers build idols. Be aware. But that's another thing. Now, when the society was was placed upon earth, then the whole idea of being affixed, or you depend on the earth. Therefore, you become krepeshchiny. You're affixed to the earth. That's where the idea of landowners came. Because you're not supposed to consider big thing. You have a piece of land, you belong to the land. The land feeds you. There's no reason for you to wander. The only reason you wander is you go to monasteries on pilgrimages. In order what? To acquire more grace. To see how there are those holy wells or holy icons or something. You come and draw that grace. And when you go on a pilgrimage, you wash yourself. You go to Banya. With fear and trembling, you wash yourself. Then you put the best clean clothing. You take nothing with you. No limousines, no Jaguars. You walk on a holy place. You walk on holy ground. You come to a monastery, you walk on tiptoes on holy ground. You are aware of sanctity because they all come from Jesus. And you love Jesus. You're aware He's come from another world and He leads us to that. So here upon this earth, you're only temporarily. That's why you begin to admire all the birds and nature and everything. There's Jan Damaskin, a beautiful poem by Alexei Tolstoy, when he blesses all the fields and everything, because it's all a reflection of what's going to happen. He's aware of this other world. That is the essence of our Christian civilization. Then, and the canon law, I was just all bound up with that. Christian land, ownership. Then the last names. You are Mr. Anderson. In Russian system, you even have your patronymic. You bear your father's first name. You say, like my name. Gleb is my name, and my daddy was Dmitry. So I'm Dmitrievich. I'm Dmitry's son. Gleb, Dmitry's. And then you're the last name. And last name is bound up with the land or location. My place, Podmoshensky. Moh means moss. Pod means under or a lower aspect. So there were one family was over with their moss higher and one was lower. So that affixes you to a particular land. It doesn't mean that you're a slave of this thing. No. It means that that's where you came from. That's where your, and same thing with profession. If you're a tailor, you have a professional tailor, and so on. They had that so-called patriarchal, because the idea of father, patros, and that there was this stability. Man he knew who he was and where he goes. If he doesn't want to, he can work himself out and so on. But he knows the identity. As I mentioned, he comes to church and he sees the icon of Jesus, male figure. Icon of Mother of God, female figure. You can identify yourself, who you are, where you go. Nowadays, all mixed up. If you dissect today's kids, it's horror. The closest real thing is to them is Dracula. That's a big thing. They know nothing about God, about law. Or you can finish high school, you don't even heard of the word virtue. They don't teach anything. It's a particular philosophy. Now, but Christians had a whole set of values. Then the whole idea of army, the idea of taking arms against those who destroy your Kremlin or your Holy of Holies, who comes and kills your standing before the icon of God, before your Creator. He assaults your state. You have to defend. Not attack, but defend. That's justification of the army. And the principle is taken from Saint Michael, the archangel, who had to have a job because Satan fell and took a whole legion of demons with him. That is, fallen angels. So to defend God, Michael stood up, and good angels joined him. And there is this rage in heaven going on. And we, Christians, feel this. And we can see clearly what's going on. That demon is taking over our children, using now all the news media, clearly. So an army has a ranks, that is, various positions of subordination. And it's interesting. It's taken from an angelic order. And it's interesting that angels hear the voice of God and are obedient. But demons do not hear. So demons do not know what is right and what is wrong. They cannot guess. So therefore they devise the system of spies. The whole system of spies comes straight from the idea of, you can clearly express by the life of Theophilus, the penitent. You'll hear that in the book. It was revealed to him, the idea of how demons, the gradation of demons, how the smaller demons, small demons, are subordinate to bigger demons and so on. There's big Satan and so on. It's all, so in order to, they are there, God allowed it. Now, next thing, about the schooling business. The schooling, nowadays we have this particular torture that you expose the poor children to. They have to work like factory workers. They have to come in the morning, have to go through this line, have to do all those business. It's so unnatural, and therefore very many gifted children are actually disastrous because they cannot, because they're created individuals, they cannot get into this mold, this particular soulless system. So the Christian was not. There were no schools in early Christianity. There were no schools. The universities, the Greek and Roman universities, all fell apart. In its place, their place took monasteries. That's where the college, universities. And still, they build the universities here in America in the principle of a monastery, with the cloister, the belfry, and all that. Even Chico is copying the principle of. And in England, many, in fact, most of the surviving abbeys and monasteries were actually turned into schools like Oxford, Cambridge, straight from monasteries. Now, the schooling, therefore, was the Saint Cosmas of Aetolia says, evil will come to humankind through learned men. In other words, when learning is not directed to fear of God, it becomes what? Abomination before God, and becomes like Faust, wanting to live forever. The whole idea of Faust, selling your soul to the devil. Schooling, therefore, was done in the deacon's house. Deacon's job was to see to it that the principle of learning the Word of God, or rather, the learning about getting a knowledge about life and so on, should come through the prism of ecclesiastical values, set of values. Therefore, the house of the deacon was the school. Everybody knew. He comes there, and that's where you learn. The next thing is hospitals. Modern hospitals, a direct derivative of hospices, or it comes from host or hospitality. They are a place where you travel from one holy place to another, and you stop overnight, or somebody feels sorry for you. They are called the centers of God workers, Bogatelya in Russian. And that is, it started, there were no hospitals at the beginning. When you're sick, the monastery takes care of you. And so when you travel, you go to a monastery. That's where you have. And in a monastery, you have oneness of soul. Monastery composed of people who dedicate themselves, die to God. Die to all the next thing. The hospitals is bound up with the idea of guests. And hotel comes from that too, hotel. Motel is that which has a motor, but it's a hotel. Then there's the idea of hospital healing was done in honor because, as Ambrose of Upsala says, you're not supposed to be restoring your full health because that means you're going against God's promise. But you are allowed to have aspirin, a little medicine, and all that to make it easier. Because we are here temporarily. And through the failing of our health, we actually acquire closeness to paradise, to end. And Russians even say when a person got sick, they say, God visited him, therefore we must come and visit. That's what Jesus said, go and visit sick. He go and visit sort of because he's alone. But it doesn't say, take roses and give those pink, silly cards, hold the cards, and here's what we have. That's not the point. The point is that God visited them. Go and draw from him that grace. That's what it means. He's suffering. Okay, next thing is the idea of trading or markets or secular or ecclesiastical goods. The idea of trading, the idea of gaining, the idea of making the gospel, to trade when you get money from
exchange.
Exchange. In exchange what?
Barter.
Interest.
Usury.
Bartering, usury, that's right. You make money. See? It's approved by Jesus. He talks about that. He talks because you have to, it says, gathers in me. The idea of gathering some goods for the good of your family, those around, the sick, the unfortunate, the poor, and glorifying God by beautifying the churches. The next thing, architecture. The architecture had to do a job, which today's architecture, in fact, I think the biggest murder of modern society, the cause of that man who was killing and suffering, made poor Sister Mary suffer in San Francisco, is clearly was influenced by the architecture, soulless, crushing phenomena of so-called Tau, images of Tau, Babylon, with Babel, is skyscrapers. The idea is this: architecture was designed by human genius in order to house a man. But not only to house him, but to make him in his hole in the ground or whatever, not only comfortable, that's secondary, but to feel like a human being, which is created in the image of God. That's why we have these temples, even pagan, all these refined beauty, the statues and all that. You know, a man wants to feel noble. Architecture and arts ennoble the soul. That's their job. And thus, architecture, the ecclesiastical architecture, is bound up with the temple. You have the, as I mentioned before, you know, the temple, then the Holy of Holies, which is the altar, and then you have the narthex, which is the court. So this triple thing appears in all styles of Christian architecture. The houses were designed in such a way that you live there. What's the difference? You can live there together with in a pig pen, right? With horses and cows. What's the difference? The difference, you are not a horse or a cow. You're a human being. Therefore, you're on a higher level than they. They serve you. They were created to serve man. Therefore, you have to make distinction between your halls, where you worship God, where you respect men of God, who bear godliness, and where you respect your own people, your guests and so on, and then you have guest villas, you have stables and so on. It's a definite division of structure in order to preserve divine dignity in man, which is reflected through architecture, in order to worship him. Therefore, the most exalted architecture structures are, of course, the temples. And there, various attempts of making beauty, intricacy, the whole idea of arches or the domes, the image of vault of heaven, the pillar support, and so on, the whole big thing. It is to reflect the heavenly abodes. That's why we have the in the Romanesque style, for example. It's a big subject here. Then the temple, the castles, the palaces. It's not only to display riches on, and not everybody is very rich, but everything has to be dignified, elegant, and elevating the spirit which is in us, which is eternal. Therefore, decorations and all that, and arts come in there. And, of course, together with that, music. Music also. We do not know which came first, worship or music, music or worship. They're bound together. And therefore, music refines the soul. Elder of Obcina Varsanofi said, teach your child music and dancing. And she said to him, oh, Father, why? We are Orthodox Christians who believe in Manus and so on. He said, no, teach them music and dancing. It refines the soul and body. By body doesn't mean that, aerobics and all that business, but it means that body carries the soul and therefore reflects. And it's interesting, in refined ballet, you can see very great dignified poses. Nowadays they don't care, but originally the whole idea was all these positions to take is very dignified positions in order to lift the soul from barbarism. It's direct result of ecclesiastical mentality. Then, same thing with arts, theater. It's a whole subject we'll talk about later on. Then, food. The Christians had a different attitude towards food. Nowadays, you can go any place, you can even keep your motor going, you smell that exhaust fumes, and then you get the double burger, and you chew and throw away, and this thing go further on, and so on. Then you take guns and shoot, see? And it sort of goes together. They even say this, if you want to stop smoking, if you're hooked and you're suffering from that, if you stop smoking, stop eating meat. If you will continue eating meat, you will never quit smoking. Bound up with that, see? Now, food is a holy activity. Eating food is holy activity. It prolongs our life, sustains our life. Therefore, it has to be done with dignity, respect, awe, piety, and fear of God. We say, give us our daily bread. That is, we ask God to give us food so that we can live longer, prepare ourselves for paradise, and do good upon this earth. That's the reason we eat. And that's the reason we don't eat. We fast for that reason. And now modern New Age doctors prove to you that all these things that we've been monks were talking about our diet, was correct. Absolutely correct. All these beans and others was correct stuff. And all the things of constant meat and all is wrong. And the church divides how often you can have meat. In every week you have 2 days you don't have any meat and any milk products. It's a rhythm. So your organism can easily get rid of it. Same thing with fasting. Same thing with feasting. You're supposed to feast. You're supposed to glorify God. The wine and oil allowed. The first miracle Jesus performed was making out of water wine. The very wine that makes people go crazy over it. Why? Because it's a wrong understanding of it. Now, next thing. Same thing with food. Is the respect of daily bread. And there is a formal partaking of it. And informal. The formal is bound up with church, beginning with receiving, eating the Holy Eucharist. Therefore, after that, then you come to trapeza and you share the meal which is done with the blessing. You go and light the stove, you light it from the icon, which is before the relics. Liturgy cannot be performed without a relic, piece of body of a soul, of a saint. Body. Jesus sanctified the body, the earth. So food is a holy thing. And therefore, it's also interesting that one student in our seminary said, I can't stand this etiquette, 3-4 spoons and so on. And Father Constantine said, looked at him very angrily and said, that comes straight from the apostolic times. I beg your pardon. And the answer is very simple. The idea of respect, that idea of awe and trembling and dignity, and with that comes in beauty, with that comes harmony, refinement, and more, and goes on by partaking in a particular order which makes a big difference. If you take a harp and start banging in it, the beautiful Tchaikovsky concerto won't come out. But if you be very careful, you touch at that time, and then you don't, and let the other thing in, then you come out with a very refined thing. Same thing here. You partake of a special way. Now, unfortunately, because rich people started imitating the God-anointed kings and emperors, whose job was to, as I said, to sanctify the sun to rise over the earth. So they were viewing life with holiness. We lost that because these rich people that kill and they get that money and try to imitate becomes weird and stupid, and obviously we have obviously there's no power. But when you are like the if you lead a refined life and you come from the trapeza, what feeling you get when you come and partake. You should have seen Archbishop John come from the church. He came and he sat on a tip like that, not like that, on a tip. He's aware, like some prince and princess, they're aware of the guests. That means they have to present and install in them an image, the feeling of honor, dignity, valor, masculinity, refinement, gentleness. That's why we have the gentlemen. We have to install in them, and there is a particular order of this, just like a symphony. You have a particular instruments take just a little bit, so we have to know a right thing. And also, there's a whole theory now what kind of food to eat. That you cannot have mixed these fruits together with something else and something else. And they had a whole particular system of partaking food in such a way that it is dignified and good for the human soul. It adds to the perception of otherworldliness. It's all related. It's all bound up with the dignity. So when Father Constantine told us that the etiquette, and he said that, he gave an example, that there was a group of people at a table, at one prince, and one of them was a mujik. And because the mujik was a humble man, his greatest virtue was humility, that he was the most refined person in that table. He ate with perhaps even with his own fingers, but he ate most refinedly, because he partook of food which unites him to God. This is what so-called life of piety is, or благочестие. Same thing with the idea of table manners, of course, yeah. And with that is also bound up so-called entertainment. The idea of entertainment in Russian does not exist. The closest would be развлечение, which is actually distraction. The idea of entertainment is to feed your soul. That's why we read the lives of saints. When we partake, we entertain or we fortify our soul with food, only it's a spiritual food. As we partake of, we fill ourselves with bodily food, so also we have to fill ourselves with spiritual food. And when we have that attitude, that awe and trembling, as Professor Katsevich said how he felt in Obstina, he said that every monk in Obstina he felt was actually walking on tiptoes before God and the brothers. And can you imagine what kind of attitude they had with brothers between each other? They were afraid to say something that might hurt him, that might that he is seeking that isikia, and it breaks that isikia. It's your fault. So he was careful, so that because through that isikia, the voice of God's conscience, through your conscience, the voice of God becomes apparent. Or like medicine in a particular uniform. When you go to an army, you have a particular uniform there. Even stewardesses have a particular uniform. Everyone has clothing, has a particular language. You have to, something, you go to the barn, you put some kind of simple clothes, but then you go to an opera, you put another type. You go to visit a sick, one thing, and you go to a beach, another. So we, nowadays, the attempt is to get rid of all that. Get rid even of our gender. So we are outside, we look the same. So there'll be no, it's actually a communist idea. The idea, you know, when in China they installed communism, it was forbidden to have women dressed in women's clothing. They all have to have the same uniform and the same drabby look. And that is because of rejecting the distinction of man, woman, children, and society upon this earth. Together with fashions or dress comes in, let's say, the clergy. You know how the clergy is vested, the Old Testament, so. But together with that comes in public behavior. We call certain things indecent, certain things very noble, certain things are very friendly, some things are very, very repulsive. We have a whole set of behavior which Christianity had to learn and study and make as an inheritance for Christians, for a purpose of leading here upon this earth a life that is pleasing to God and functional between people. The fashions are bound up with the idea of permissiveness. And permissiveness is bound up with daringness. And daringness is bound up with brazenness of soul. And brazenness of soul is bound up with the lack of fear of God. And the fear of God, it says, is wisdom. Wisdom leads man to the reality of God upon this earth. That is, you begin to notice God's providence upon this earth. Therefore, when a person is dressed not according to Christian principles, he hinders the understanding of God's providence working upon each other, upon people. In other words, the dress and behavior indicates your position, closer or farther away from God. Not because they say, oh, she's very smartly dressed, because somebody else said it, but the idea is appropriate to the occasion. And that the way people are dressed, the way they behave, as I said, indicates and also is a demonstration of man's closeness to God. A person who is, it's a study about the brazenness, fearlessness before God. Philocolic wisdom commands that a man must watch his step all the time. Not in the sense that he's sort of paralyzed and is scared what to do next, or he calculates. No. That means God is his providence. And God created him in the image of, so he is full of self-esteem, mind you. Everybody's now squashed. That's why they're craving for self-esteem. Because people are not Christians anymore. The society is making them like robots. They have no feeling. So obviously they're squashed. And then they come to psychiatrists and say, well, you must have self-esteem. Sure. Self-esteem what? You're created in the image of God. That's your self-esteem. That means you have fear of God. Fear to hurt others. Fear not to lose God's movement in your life. That's what it means. But nowadays no one pays attention. Because we are heard. This gray, like Pushkin said, gray mass, serые массы. That's where we have no personality. And that you can't blame. We only blame our estrangement from Orthodox, patriarchal way of life. Next thing, the manners, the behavior, and the language. It's very important. Language is that which united men and women so that they can work at peace and do the work of God. When, as you know from the Bible story, when people began so proud and decided to build a tower big enough to really, as Lenin said, to show figure to God, to really show him to God, then God, to punish them or to humble them down, gave various languages. You know, and they couldn't function. One says, give me a hammer, and he says, дай мне молоток. Молоток, молоко, mean milk, mean milk. Молоток, молоток, дай мне молоток. And he doesn't know what's going on. And so they got all mixed up, and they couldn't build anymore. And it was the Holy Spirit descended on the birthday of the church that united them in one language. They began to understand each other. It says they spoke different languages, different tongues. But actually it meant they had oneness of soul and they could understand. That's what the elders, you come to up to an elder and he looks at you and he sees a whole world that you are made of. And he sees where you are poor and weak. And he tells you. And you don't know why. He says, avoid apples, or remember that egg. And you don't know. And then you start thinking, yes, he sees your whole life is revealed to you. Because he has that oneness of soul with God, with the whole heavenly world. So language is exceedingly important. St. James the Apostle says, our worst enemy is our own tongue. Because we can hurt, we can kill a man. And most of the murders are done by, not nowadays of course, probably with guns, but former days by giving obediences to kill. So language is power. And language in the mouth of a Christian is a source of grace. It can lead man to God. All instructions are already in language. Therefore, it is a sacred thing. And Jesus even came into us as a word, logos. So, an attitude of man towards language, towards this communication, is a sacred thing where man can be changed and can acquire sanctity and go to paradise. Thus, and then of course the woman's position we'll talk later on. All these things are necessary for us to understand. Now that's patriarchal. Later on, Christianity historically began to lose that fervency. And don't ask questions, because Father Damascene says the reason why nobody asks questions in your lectures is not because they're so dense or you're so profound. You're simply afraid that you'll keep on going talking. So I won't say, but I want to conclude that our society is now at the bottom. We have unwound, we lost all that. We lost Christian understanding. And therefore, many good Christian texts don't mean anything to us. A simple example, David Copperfield. Nowadays, For some reason, some say in high school, read that book. It's a good book, sort of. It's a nice story. But actually, they don't have no feeling. Somebody farewell to arms is much bigger thing to them, because we lost this. If you go to these videos, most people watch these stupid things because they say something in terms of a man. When it's some kind of good movies in the 30s, it means nothing because it has no point of reference. Now, they lost it. And therefore, interesting, when they make a same movie, same story, take a movie made in the 30s, they tell of two cities. And the recent one is a big difference. Because in there, you feel a Christian message comes right through. In modern, it doesn't. It doesn't, and perhaps they're good actors, the whole thing, certainly it's paid more money to make it. But the result is, it's estranged from Christian experience, Christian pattern. So therefore, we today must be aware that the society is consciously turning against Christianity. And our job is to go contrary to that. We must go historically to the back to understand the whole Christianity, then view today's reality in that light and look forward to future, because that's the meaning of Christianity, is eternity. I have to pack a lot of stuff in this, that's why I'm rushing. You're expected to, what I just said, expected to know, expected to explain the patriarchal society, the apostasy, and modern age. Why we behave the way we do. And we have to end on a good note, that even though society is bad and everything is falling apart, nevertheless, God raises saints even today. And they're the 20th century people, and we keep on receiving information more and more about righteous men and women. By the way, where is Gregory? Didn't come yet? No, our Father Gregory. He's not here. Didn't come yet. Okay. More and more information we get about righteous people of 20th century. As I said, this very interesting mother, blind eldress, Matrona, who saw with her inward eye the reality, proves that the power of Christian pathos, Orthodox sanctity, is alive. We have today saints. Just recently we published Play Elder Theodore. It's sort of a hymn to sanctity of 20th century. Therefore, cheer up, but don't give up. We have to know the principle of Christianity, what we know, and be able to convey to the young generation, which is not stupid. You'll be quite surprised. They're not that stupid. They get the point. But you have to present them in such a way that it makes sense to them, by not depriving that which they have. That is, they are raised on these years, 80s and 90s. That's their foundation. You can't take it off. You have to build on that maybe very little, but on that foundation. You have, because Jesus, yesterday, today, and forever. Amen.